Imagine Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. A city of golden domes, marble palaces, and narrow streets where every whisper could become a weapon. It was here that the name, Theodora, once sounded like a curse. In her youth, she was an actress and courtesan. Everyone knew her, not as a noble lady, but as a woman who performed in risque shows. Chroniclers wrote that her shows were so indecent that they cannot be described in words. For the crowd, she was a spectacle; for the nobility, she was the shame of the city. Now imagine the paradox. This same woman would later wear the imperial crown. She would become the wife of Justinian, one of the most powerful rulers of all time. She would sit next to him on the throne, pass laws, and influence the church and the Senate. And those who once mocked her would tremble at her gaze. From scenes of shame to majestic palaces. To some, she was a devil; to others, a holy patroness. This is the story of Theodora, an empress whose fate is more dramatic than any legend. In Constantinople, there were entire markets where you could buy a young girl, for entertainment. Often these were orphans or children of the poor. The girls were displayed to buyers almost like cattle. It was in this atmosphere that the world in which Theodora found herself was formed. She was not born in a palace or into a wealthy family. Her father worked as a trainer in a circus, and after his death, her mother barely managed to support her children. In such a world, there was only one way up for a girl: the stage. But it is worth explaining. Theater, in Byzantium, had almost nothing to do with art. The word, actress, sounded almost like a synonym for prostitute. And that is where young Theodora began her journey. Chronicles mention that after performances, actresses could be forcibly expelled from the theater and led through the streets amid the shouts of the crowd. People mocked them, threw stones or dirt at them. It was public humiliation that branded them with shame. And the humiliation did not end even after death. In Constantinople, actresses were buried in separate cemeteries. Their graves were not allowed to be placed next to honest women. The stigma of shame followed them even to the grave. Her performances quickly became legendary, but in a bad way. Procopius of Caesarea, a well-known chronicler and one of her harshest critics, wrote in his secret history that what Theodora did on stage was impossible to describe in words. He accused her of debauchery, hinted that she allegedly gave herself to many men in a row, and invented stories that modern historians consider outright slander. Was this true? It's hard to say. Modern researchers agree that Procopius exaggerated because he wrote his book out of hatred for the empress. But the very fact that such rumors circulated made Theodora a symbol of shame for the entire city. For the crowd, she was a spectacle. For herself, she was a daily humiliation. But it was there, at rock bottom, that she learned the most important lesson: how to turn weakness into a weapon against those who consider you inferior. In this world, even being born into an actress's family was a curse. The daughters of courtesans were automatically considered unclean, and could not marry into respectable families. The stigma of shame was passed down from generation to generation. But even the most sensational performances do not last forever. Theodora's fame as an actress and courtesan quickly faded. When new girls came on stage, her name no longer drew crowds. She became useless in the world of entertainment. It seemed that her chance to break out of this cycle came when an influential official from Syria took her away with him. For Theodora, it seemed like an escape from her past, not the stage, but a new life with a wealthy man. But her dreams quickly fell apart. Her lover lost interest and abandoned her. In a foreign country, without money or support, she found herself back where she had fled from, earning money as best she could by selling her body. It was probably the lowest point in her life. In those days, most courtesans did not live to see their 30s. Diseases that could not yet be treated ate away at their bodies. Street doctors even called it God's punishment. Theodora knew very well that every day of such a life could be her last. And then the story becomes more like a legend. Chronicles say that she set off back to Constantinople through the desert. Lonely, exhausted, almost dying of hunger and thirst, she walked this path as a symbolic purification. Was this literally true? Modern historians doubt it. Perhaps it is more of an image that emphasized the drama of her biography. But whatever the case, she returned a changed woman. A new strength was born within that rejected girl: toughness and determination. She no longer had any illusions. You can't trust anyone, and weakness in this world is a death sentence. This inner coldness made her the woman who would eventually sit on the throne and rule the empire. Returning to Constantinople, Theodora was no longer the confused girl from the stage. She had passed her lower level and learned to read people the way others read books. And here, a plot twist that seems almost unbelievable. The city still remembered her past, so the gateway to the top should have been tightly closed. But just then, Justinian, the emperor's nephew and future heir, appeared on her path. He was educated, ambitious, and had a clear plan to transform the empire. Why did he choose Theodora? The sources do not give a direct answer. The hostile Procopius tries to explain it by her cunning and manipulation, but modern historians are more likely to talk about her intelligence, political intuition, and ability to take a hit. One way or another, an alliance arose between them, and it was a scandal for the nobility. The obstacle was not romantic, but legal. Under the law at that time, men of higher social status were forbidden to marry actresses. And then something unprecedented happened. The law was changed, according to the chronicles, during the reign of Emperor Justin I, at the request of Justinian, allowing former actresses who had left the stage to marry their equals. The fact that the law was changed is well documented, so this is not a legend, but reality. The wedding took place, and Constantinople was abuzz. For the courtiers, it was contemptible; for Theodora, it was a triumph. She crossed a line that almost no one before her had crossed. From then on, her role was no longer a shadow beside the future ruler, but a partner who would increasingly influence the decisions and people around the throne. When Justinian ascended the throne, Theodora no longer looked like just the emperor's wife. She became his partner, whose opinion could carry more weight than the words of generals and senators. Her true power was revealed during the Nika riots in 532. The city was burning. Crowds set buildings on fire and demanded the emperor's removal. Imagine the capital of the empire on the verge of complete collapse. Justinian himself was frightened and prepared to flee. His advisors were already arranging for ships. And that was when Theodora spoke up. Chroniclers record her words, which have become historic. "Power is a beautiful coffin. It is better to die an empress than to live in exile." This speech stopped the emperor. He ordered harsh measures. Troops entered the hippodrome, where the crowd had gathered, and dispersed the uprising by force. According to sources, between 30,000 and 40,000 people were killed. The dead were not buried with honors. The bodies were hastily taken to mass graves in order to remove the traces of the tragedy as quickly as possible. For the city's residents, this was another shock. Yesterday they were neighbors and relatives, and today they were nameless bodies underground. For a long time, people in the city were afraid to remember that day. Among the dead were entire families who were destroyed together, without distinguishing between those who were guilty and those who were accidental witnesses. For many residents of Constantinople, the tragedy of the Nika was a personal wound that they carried with them throughout their lives. The uprising also destroyed the city itself. Fire engulfed Constantinople, burning down palaces, houses, and even the main temple, the Church of St. Sophia. But Justinian and Theodora decided to rebuild it. Thus, the new St. Sophia of Constantinople was created, a magnificent cathedral that still impresses with its architecture today. For Justinian, it was not just a restoration of the temple, but a demonstration of victory and power. He proclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you," hinting that the new Hagia Sophia was more magnificent than King Solomon's temple. Historians believe that without Theodora's determination, these grandiose plans might never have come to fruition. The situation was dire, but it was this moment that saved the throne. Without Theodora's determination, the empire could have lost its power. From then on, everyone feared her, senators, bishops, even military leaders. If she said, "Stand to the end," no one dared to retreat. And they began to fear her as much as they feared the emperor. Theodora remembered her humiliation, and she was not going to let others remind her of it. She used power as a shield and a sword. And so anyone who questioned her strength was taking a risk. They say that it was impossible to say a word against the empress in the palace. There was always an ear that would report it to her. According to Procopius of Caesarea, her main critic and author of The Secret History, there was a whole network of spies at court. No conversation remained secret. In every corner there could be a servant or an official ready to report what they heard to the empress. Procopius even wrote that she did not shy away from poisoning. If a dangerous rival appeared among the generals or aristocrats, his death was only a matter of time. Is this true? Historians disagree. Most are convinced that Procopius greatly exaggerated because he hated Theodora and deliberately portrayed her as a devil in power. There were other accusations as well. For example, that she was particularly cruel to courtesans. She expelled them from the city or punished them because she saw in them a reflection of her own past. But here, too, it is difficult to distinguish fact from legend. Whatever the reality, the effect was obvious. Everyone in the palace knew that it was better not to cross Theodora. Even silence when meeting her seemed safer than words. We will never know if she really poisoned her enemies. But the fear of her was very real. And this fear was more powerful than any evidence. Two worlds coexisted in Theodora's image. For some, she was the embodiment of cruelty. For others, she was a savior and protector. All historians agree on one fact. Theodora knew what it meant to be a woman who had been humiliated. And once she was on the throne, she did what no ruler before her had dared to do. She passed laws prohibiting the sale of girls to brothels. She allowed those who had already been drawn into the world of forced prostitution to leave this work. A shelter for former courtesans even appeared in Constantinople, a place where they could start a new life. This is a documented fact, not a legend. But life in the shelter was like semi-imprisonment. Former courtesans were forced to wear simple clothes without adornments to distinguish them from honest women. It was a kind of mark of their past that they carried with them even after escaping from the brothels. And not everyone could endure this new life. Some women fled the shelter and returned to the brothels. For them, freedom without adornment and choice proved unbearable. For some, even slavery in a world of debauchery seemed easier than the strict control and loneliness within the walls of the charity house. Another source of controversy was her religious position. Theodora supported the Monophysites, a Christian movement that the official church considered heresy. This made her an enemy of the patriarchs in the capital, but at the same time a true heroine for thousands of believers in the east of the empire. Now let's remember Procopius. In his secret history, he portrayed Theodora as a devil. He wrote that she allegedly destroyed her enemies, poisoned her rivals, and controlled a web of intrigue. For him, she was a symbol of darkness in power. So, in medieval sources, we see two images. On the one hand, a merciful protector of women and heretics, and on the other, a devil in power. The irony of fate is that after her death, the church added her name to the calendar of saints. The woman whom her contemporaries reviled as the shame of the city later became a holy empress. Even more ironic was that her greatest enemy, Procopius of Caesarea, was later condemned by the church for slander. As a result, it was not his hatred that remained in memory, but her strength and image as a holy empress. Theodora died young, at around the age of 48. According to sources, the cause may have been a serious illness, most likely cancer. Death did not erase the fear and respect she inspired. Justinian outlived her by almost 2 decades and continued the policies they had created together until the end of his life. Today, historians argue. Who was she? A merciful reformer who gave women a chance to escape the slavery of prostitution? Or a ruthless ruler who kept the empire in a web of intrigue? Her life is a striking contrast. From a young actress who was considered the shame of Constantinople, to an empress whose name was entered into the church calendar. From the stage, where she was ridiculed, to the throne, where she commanded generals and senators. Theodora proved that even the greatest humiliation can be turned into strength. She turned weakness into a weapon and shame into power. And here the question arises. Can the past be forgiven if it was precisely what made possible the changes that left their mark on history?